Good afternoon to all of those that are here already. We are going to wait just a minute or two more, if that's okay, to make sure that everybody that is trying to get onto the virtual forum has an opportunity to do so. So if you'll just give us about maybe 2 minutes, we'll probably start around 12:02 or 12:03. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started, and those that are not in yet have an opportunity to get in anytime that they are able to log on. So anyway, welcome to the VATRE information meeting. You know, our goal with these meetings is to provide our community with the facts about the upcoming voter approval tax rate election. That we will cover the challenges that are facing our district that led to us calling this VATRE, the facts about public school finance, and the impact that VATRE will have on the future of our district. Our goal is that everyone who is here will leave feeling informed about the upcoming election. So we're excited to be able to host this presentation virtually, but we wanted to provide our community with a range of opportunities to connect with us and receive this information, and we hope this will be a good experience for you guys. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started. To ensure a smooth experience for all the participants, attendee video and microphones will remain off during the webinar. If you have any questions at any time during the presentation, please send it directly to us using the Zoom chat. The chat has been set so that you can message only the host or the co-host. So if you're on your laptop or a desktop, you just move the mouse to the bottom of your screen to display the Zoom toolbar. Click on the chat icon, and in the chat window, select New Chat, and then choose my name from that list. On your phone, you will tap the chat icon at the bottom of your screen next to the bell. Tap the drop down arrow, and then select my name, Marc Faulkner, as a co-host, and send that message on, and those should come to me. So toward the end of the session, we'll take an opportunity to answer 4 or 5 of those questions live as time allows. I want to be respectful of your time, and then we'll also answer any other questions on our frequently asked questions page on our website. So I encourage you to go there as well and look at any other questions that have the answers to that you may want to follow up with. And then if it's something that's a little more specific to you or something like that, we'll follow up directly with an email to you. So at China Spring, we're proud to deliver high quality education where students outperform the state academically, supported by small class sizes and diverse opportunities in agriculture, academics, fine arts, and career pathways like engineering, nursing, and agriculture. These successes are possible because of strong community support and a shared commitment to what matters most, which are great teachers, the manageable class sizes so our students can receive personalized instruction, innovative programs for our kids to choose from, and the resources to be able to sustain all of them. But the reality is that due to stagnant school funding from the state and inflation costs, we face financial challenges that threaten our ability to be able to maintain the quality that our community values. And without changes, it will be increasingly difficult to protect the opportunities and experience that define China Spring ISD. Our district is facing three major challenges right now. One is recruiting and retaining quality teachers and staff. Our district is one of the lowest paying districts in the area. We compete with Midway, Waco, Robinson ISD, Conley, and Lorena to get the same qualified teachers as they're receiving. And as you can see on the slide, we are on average paying about $5,300 less for starting pay than these other districts. Because we do not have the funding to increase our pay scale to offer a competitive salary, our district has explored creative solutions to make our career opportunities a little more attractive. For example, in 2022, we implemented the 4-day school week. Our turnover rate for teachers is declining, but retention and recruitment are still an issue. Last year, of the 58 employees who left the district and completed exit interviews, 43% of them listed better compensation as their first or second choice for the reason of leaving the district. We are not competitive with our salaries, and this is impacting our ability to compete for qualified educators. Number two challenge that we're facing is stagnant funding. The Texas legislature funds every public school on a per student basis. Through a formula, Texas sets what is called the basic allotment. The Texas legislature recently voted to increase the basic allotment by $55 per student. And this is the first increase, though, we've seen since 2019. So this $55 increase is what our legislator has decided that's enough to pay for the massive inflation that we've seen over the last 4 years. For China Spring ISD, that means we receive an additional $156,310 on the basic allotment for our entire district. So when you think about a $38 million budget, this increase does not have a significant impact. Number three challenge that we're facing is inflation of costs, like I mentioned earlier. Since 2019, inflation has increased approximately 25%, and school operating costs in Texas have risen by approximately 14 to 19%, which is outpacing the funding that we're receiving to run the district. Recognizing these challenges, our leadership team has taken deliberate steps to be proactive, to be efficient, and to be responsible for taxpayer dollars. We're always prioritizing students and instruction during this process. The first thing we've done is intentional staffing decisions. As staff members leave the district for new opportunities, we carefully evaluate each position before deciding to refill that role. Through this process, we've already reduced our teaching staff by 4 positions and our administrative staff by 3 positions. This saved the district approximately $494,000 for the last couple of years. This means our existing staff members have stepped up to take on some additional responsibilities. The second thing we've done is we completed a staffing study. We partnered with the Texas Association of School Boards to complete a staffing study which compared our staffing levels with similar sized districts. We chose to participate in the study to make sure that we are meeting the needs of our students without being overstaffed. The study confirmed that China Spring ISD is not overstaffed. In fact, we're operating with fewer positions than many of our peer districts. If student enrollment grows, the study recommends adding key staff to maintain the areas a level of support our students and programs need. Planning ahead for this growth requires long-term sustainable funding, though. The third thing that we've done is stayed operating within fixed budgets. So for the past 4 years, China Spring ISD has maintained the exact same operating budget across all of our campuses and departments, even as the cost of classroom supplies has steadily increased. In the 23-24 school year, the district proactively reduced every budget across the board 10%. This means our teachers and staff have continued to deliver high-quality instruction and support while managing increased expenses for classroom supplies, materials, and services. We've been intentional in making adjustments to protect the classroom experience, but the reality is that the cost of running our district has outpaced the funding we receive. We've reached the point where efficiency alone is not enough. To continue attracting quality educators, maintaining the manageable class sizes that our students need, maintaining student opportunities, and keeping the level of excellence our community expects, we need long-term sustainable funding. This is why the district has called the voter approval tax rate election, also known as a VATRE. A VATRE provides an opportunity for our community to secure additional funding needed to address these challenges responsibly. To understand how a VATRE works, it's important to first review how Texas funds public schools. I think it's important for our conversation to watch a really quick behind the scenes video on how Texas public schools are funded.
The public education system in Texas is huge and critical to the future of our state. Smart planning and adequate funding are essential to making the system work for each and every Texan. Where does the money for public education come from? Let's break it down. First, think of funding schools like filling up a glass of water. The water in the glass represents the amount of money the Texas legislature allocates to educate each student. The water is sourced from two primary pitchers. The first is school district revenue generated by local property taxes. The second is state funds, which are generated by things like sales taxes, business taxes, and lottery proceeds. The water glass has the ability to shrink or grow. But many people are surprised to learn that the size of a Texas school district's water glass, or how much money is available for and spent on day-to-day school operations, is decided almost entirely by the state legislature, not school boards or superintendents. Under state law, schools receive a certain amount of per student funding based on specific student demographics and district characteristics. Funding formulas designed by the legislature provide school districts with general operating funds, most of which cover salaries for teachers and staff. Other parts of the funding formula are designated for specific priorities like career and technical programs, early childhood education, and more. While the state legislature decides how big the water glass is, how much money the state actually contributes is contingent on the amount of local property taxes generated by a school district. In our complex school funding system, when local property values go up and tax collections increase, local schools do not receive more funding. Instead, the state simply pours less water into the glass, even though more state funds were originally budgeted and intended for public education. But what happens if school district revenue generated by local property taxes is able to fill the whole glass? More water is poured than the glass size can hold. The state collects those overflowing funds in a separate water pitcher that holds general revenues for the state. So when a school district's property tax revenues go up, those dollars are not always reinvested back into our schools. Instead, the state uses its newfound billions to pay for other items in the state budget, or simply holds on to the extra revenue. That doesn't seem right. Tell Texas lawmakers money intended for Texas public schools should stay in Texas public schools.
Okay, some key things in that video of how Texas schools are funded is one, that the state legislature decides how big each district's glass is and how much funds it can hold, not necessarily the superintendent or the school board. There are two different streams of money that fill the district's glass. That first stream of funds starts filling the glass first, and that is with your local property tax stream. Then the state fills the rest of the glass with the state supplied stream. And sometimes this is a 50-50 share. And then in sometimes, as you saw in the video, a local school district can fill the glass completely up and they do not receive any state funds. The fourth thing that I want you to take away from that video is that when local property values go up, which increases the local taxes that we collect, schools do not receive more funds. The glass is the same size no matter what. And then how that glass is filled is dependent upon how much local funds is collected. So this is probably the most important takeaway from the video because a lot of people feel that when you pay more in local taxes that schools are receiving more money, and that's just simply not the case. It just changes the percentages of what the state and the local percentages are. So you're probably kind of wondering what China Spring ISD's funding percentages are. And so for us, we have 39.5% of our funding comes from local property taxes. And this was a lot higher back in 2019, but when they started tax compression, that has really shrunk it down, which is fantastic. And it's about 40% now. 58% of the funding comes from the state, and again, that was much lower a few years ago, but that has increased with the tax compression. And then about 2.5% of our funding comes from the federal government. So as I mentioned earlier, the Texas legislature did recently vote to increase that basic allotment by $55. And so they voted to make our cup just a little bigger. So everybody's cup got bigger by $55, which is the first time this has happened since 2019. And so this $55 is supposed to account for the massive inflation that we've seen over the last 4 years. But you guys know that in your homes, how much more things cost, and know that $156,000 for 3,000 kiddos, it doesn't change the basic allotment too much. But think about, your bills at home. Inflation's made things like bread and milk and vehicles, clothing, everything that we purchase as consumers more expensive. And schools aren't exempt from that either. Everything that we have to buy to support our programs and our students have increased. Just for example, property insurance alone for all of our buildings is over $750,000 a year, and that has more than doubled in the last 5 years. 3 years ago, it cost the district about $98,000 to purchase a new school bus. This year, to purchase that exact same bus, they have not changed models, styles, anything, but that exact same bus is $135,000. The same impact we see on our instructional programs and things that we use on a daily basis in our classroom. For example, IXL is one of our most used instructional programs, K through 12. And since 2023, the cost has increased annually. And this year, we're paying about $12,000 more a year than we did just 2 years ago for our IXL program. When we manage our budgets, we are monitoring our revenues and our expenditures. So our revenues are funds that we receive from the district. The district receives from local property taxes or the state, and expenditures are how that money is spent throughout the year. So China Spring ISD is projected to receive $38,678,510 in revenue this school year. And of course, that's only based on the 95.75% attendance rate that we work really, really hard every year to beat. But that is how Texas funds schools, is based on attendance. So every year we are only getting 95.75% of the allotted money that comes to us, or depending on what our attendance rate ends up. That's the money that we get from both the state. So expenditures are anything that the district spends money on, such as salaries for our staff, supplies, food services, utilities for all of our fixed costs, transportation, housekeeping, fuel, safety and security, technology and training, and the list goes on and on. Our budget, though, is comprised of kind of three major funds. The first two I'll cover really quickly because there's really strict requirements on what they can be spent on. The first is Fund 599, and this is our debt service. Money can only be used to pay for voter-approved debt payments, which are basically bond payments. And so kind of think of the 599 account as like your house payment. And so that's about 12% of our budget is the house payment. Fund 240 is our food service, and that money can only be used to feed students during the school day and pay for things for in the cafeteria, food service employees, and things like that. But it cannot be used in any other way than feeding our kiddos, and that is about 4% of our budget. And so those two funds are very limited, with very little discretion, if any, of how those funds are used. Fund 199 is the third fund, and it is our maintenance and operation fund. And it is our largest fund that we use to educate our kids. And that's 84% of our budget is this maintenance and operation fund. And so there is a little discretion in how we use these funds. And this fund, really, Fund 99, is really kind of what the board is approving when they approve an annual budget, because this is the only one that we really have control over. The other ones are specific things that they give us for certain items. And so this fund has $31,473,073 worth of revenue that comes into that fund. So let's break down the expenditures in this Fund 199. More than 80% of our expenditures are allocated for salaries, which total $26,141,266. Then 10, that's 80%. So 10% is also fixed costs, such as electricity and fuel and phone service and water, propane, internet, sewer, trash, and then the maintenance and repair of our facilities. So that really only leaves 10% of this budget as discretionary. And that is used to buy the technology and school supplies and programs and all of the consumable and non consumable items that we use on a daily basis to operate our schools. So the total expenditures for Fund 199 are 32,667,863. So a little over $1 million more than the revenue coming into it. So simply put, the revenue coming in is less than the cost to fund our programs and our people. So what about the new funding bill that happened this past summer? The media refers to it as historic funding from the Texas legislature. And so let's kind of explore how that funding we received and how it affected China Spring ISD. So the governor proudly proclaimed that the state legislature has given districts in Texas $8.5 billion over a 2-year period. That is true. In reality, though, once you take 8.5 billion, you divide it into half because it's one's for 1 year, one is for the next, and then you distribute that across 1,200 school districts and charter schools and 5.3 million students. We end up receiving in China Spring about 2.4 million in new funds, which at first that sounded amazing, and we were excited, and everything was going to be fine, and we were going to be okay. But the state loves to give us some money and then tell us exactly how we're required to spend it. And so here's kind of the breakdown of how that state mandated funds came for China Spring ISD. We got $2,483,000. And so the first allotment is the teacher retention allotment in there. We received 1,374,000 of that 2.4 million that is required for teacher pay raises. And so that's just flow through money. It comes to us and it flows right out to the teachers. That teacher retention allotment provides raises for our experienced teachers with 3 or more years of experience. And this was a much needed and much deserving raise. But here's the truth. Every single employee in our district matters. They all play a critical role in helping support the learning that goes on every day. And that left almost 50% of our employees with no raise, including our first and second year teachers. The second allotment was the support staff retention allotment. We received $120,000 for the support staff. This includes classroom aides, secretaries, nurses, counselors, librarians, maintenance workers, our 0 to 2 year experienced teachers, administrators, etc. None of that's what we received was $120,000 for all those people. That's about 225 people that are in that group. So you can see $120,000 for 225 people doesn't go very far. And so that comes up very short in offering any kind of raise. The next one is the safety allotment. We received $139,958 in this allotment that we're required to spend on school safety. However, with the 5 officers' salaries alone that we have in the district, it's more than the safety allotment, not counting the supplies, the equipment, and the vehicles, and the fuel, and et cetera, that it takes to have a police force in your own district. The allotment for basic cost increase. This was an area that we felt like at first when we saw it, we thought there was going to be just some discretion in how this was able to be used. However, we received $316,516. And this was designed to pay for TRS increases from the raises and increased insurance rates and other operating expenses. So when they gave us the $1.3 million for the teacher raises, they did not give us any increase for their TRS requirements that we have. So the district pays 8% of their TRS, and each employee pays 8% of their own TRS. Well, out of that 316,000, a little over 200,000 of it has to be allotted for the TRS increases. And so for those raises, and then with our insurance, increased insurance rates and other operating expenses, that money went very, very quickly. Special education allotment, we received $343,685 for the special education allotment that we're required to spend on our special needs kiddos. The special education program is underfunded from beginning. It only is funded by about 50%, meaning that about 50% of our our special education teachers and program supplies comes from our local budget rather than from the federal government, the state money. And so that helps. It certainly helps to go towards that, but it is still starting underfunded as opposed to being able to get caught up. The basic allotment increase we already talked about was 156,000, which meant that $55 per student. And that's how we received that, and that was discretionary money that we could spend how we needed to. So when you start with that, 2,483,000, you subtract all those things of how I mentioned you had to spend it, and that left us with about $188,000 of an increase to the budget, which I mean, it is good. It's better than a decrease to the budget. But this year's change in the budget, we only changed what we had to. All of the classroom budgets and things stayed the same, but we had to purchase some technology because we're required to do online testing for all of our grade levels. And those machines have to be rotated in and out every so many years. And so we had an increase of $247,000 in technology needs. And so you can see there that the revenue coming in of that 188,000, certainly is less than the money that's going out for the 247 for the technology, which still leaves us a deficit budget of $1,194,790, which is almost $1.2 million. So simply put, those funds that we received just weren't enough to provide, the exceptional education our students deserve, and quite frankly, we all, you included, expect. So we do have a savings fund that we have been able to use for the last several years because we've been in this problem for 2 or 3 years, and we felt pretty confident. I don't know why, but we felt pretty confident in the legislature this year that they were going to do some things for public schools, to fund public schools, because they did get vouchers passed, and we felt that was the biggest holdout. Was at the last session 2 years ago, was they would not approve vouchers, so they approved zero funding for schools. We thought this year, since they approved the vouchers, that they would appropriately fund schools. So we've been using our savings account to do that. However, we're required to keep a certain amount, which is 60 to 90 days worth of cash flow. So you can, which is operating expenses for basically 3 months. And, so that you can make payroll and do all those things in between payments from TEA that you receive for that. And this year, we will come to that point where we cannot spend any more of that savings fund to be able to make payroll and do what we need to do. So now, let's clarify one thing, though, because we do get asked this a lot, because this is the question that people come up with. Well, how can you afford a new elementary school and the gym and CTE areas and all those the things that we just currently built, but do not have the funds to pay people and programs? And it's important to know that the schools have two pieces of their tax rate, and so they have the maintenance and operation tax rate, and then they have the interest and sinking tax rate. You add those together, and that's the total tax rate. And so your maintenance and operation tax rate can be used for people and programs and day-to-day operations, but your INS tax rate can only be used for your house payment, for your bond payments. And so when you do a bond, that money is collected on the interest and sinking tax rate only, and that's all it can be used for. So when we were growing and growing and growing, in 2020 is when that bond was supposed to be. And then COVID hit. And so we had it in 21, and we built it, and we're in it. And then, starting about 22 or so, 23, we really have been flat enrollment, which is not a problem for us. We don't build anything until we're a couple of years past being full at capacity. And so, but that's how those funds can be spent. You can't do a bond election and then pay salaries out of that or any of that kind of stuff. So it's only for that house payment, that bond payments of our debt. So, which brings us, again, to why the district's called that VATRE election. It creates more funding for schools because it is just like the legislature voted this year to make our cup $55 bigger per student. A VATRE election makes your cup bigger. And so it allows us to put in, yes, a little bit more local tax dollars, but they put in a lot more state dollars. They have a pool of state dollars sitting there and waiting, but they do not add that until your community agrees to the way I like to explain it is put some skin in the game. And so about 56% is paid for by the state, and about 44% comes from local tax dollars. And so it just asks our voters to make an adjustment to that local tax rate. It asks to increase the M&O rate of that tax rate. So if it's approved, then this allows schools to access that additional funding that from that state that's just sitting there, that's already allocated, but they will not give it to you until that VATRE election is approved. So these dollars would then go directly to the maintenance and operation side part of the budget we can use for, classroom salaries and classroom support and day-to-day expenses and fixed costs and all those things. So, but without that additional funding, we will have to address our budget deficit at closer to the end of this year, because we cannot use that savings fund anymore. And how we will have to do that is we'll have to cut approximately 10 teaching positions and about 10 to 15 non-teaching positions. So these non-teaching positions are paraprofessionals and administrative assistants and hourly employees, custodians, yard crew, maintenance workers, administrators, and somehow possibly even bus drivers. I don't know how we can do that because we don't have enough of those as it is. But those are the positions. If we do that, those 20 to 25 positions, that will get us, that's about $1 million, and that'll get us close to that deficit budget. The other things that we'll do, because we'll still have about 200,000 to make up, we'll put in some decreased possibly travel ranges for our competitions for extracurricular, meaning like, for example, it could be a 75-mile radius. You can't go and compete with anybody outside that 75 miles. Obviously we'll have some issues there with UIL if we're obviously playoff games and if we're in a district that requires us to travel longer than 75 miles. But if it's non-district competition tournaments and things like that, we could, we put a radius on there to keep people closer to home, save fuel, all those hotel rooms and all those kinds of things. Cutting field trips for our students. And this is, unfortunately, this is mostly our younger grades, probably pre-K through about 6th grade. But, they do a couple of field trips a year, and cutting those would save the district some money. Cutting student programs. We don't want to do any of this, but and certainly the programs are something that, we feel like we have a lot of choice at our secondary schools for programs of study that these kiddos can go through. But some of the more expensive ones to continue to run may unfortunately be eliminated, and to save that extra savings there. And we could also look at, charging extracurricular participation fees. There are school districts out there that charge students, a certain amount of fee for a fall or a spring, or maybe it's by each individual sport or by each individual extracurricular event. And certainly we think that could be a nightmare, and we don't want to do that. But that's certainly a way that we could actually make up some of the money that we would be short to balance that budget. So the results of cutting the staff, of course, will increase our class sizes, across the district, unfortunately. And this will in turn affect the quality of education our students are receiving at some level. And so we're firm believers, though, that students need exposure to all kinds of different programs and experiences. And that's what we think makes, a well-rounded graduate, is having an opportunity, all those kinds of things, but we just simply won't be able to sustain those and provide those without the additional funding. So again, none of it is our desire. We value all of our opportunities for kids, both inside and outside the classroom. But the reality is that that's where we would be. Our goal of sharing this information is just simply to provide the community with an understanding of where we are as a district in our financial position, and why the administration recommended to the board back in August to consider a VATRE in the first place. So you may wonder how a VATRE kind of works. So the tax rate for the past year, which was 24-25, it was $1 or 1.0185. So the maximum tax rate that is set for 25-26, which is this school year, it would be reduced to 92,192. So that's almost a 10-cent reduction. It's a 9.9658 cent decrease. So almost 10 cents from last year. So we can't set a rate higher than that without voter approval. So the reduction of the rate from the state is what is called compression, and so they have compressed that down. And based on those challenges that we were facing, based on the priorities that our community identified in the survey that we sent out earlier this summer, we've asked the board to adopt a tax rate that is more than the maximum tax rate that we can set. And so the board voted unanimously to do so. And when they do that, that automatically triggers a voter approval tax rate election, which will be held November 4th. So the CSISD administration recommended to the board to adopt a maintenance and operation tax rate that is 6 cents higher than the maximum tax rate in the survey. Our community made, 6 cents higher than the maximum tax rate, because in the survey that we sent out this summer, our community made two things clear. There was a section of that survey that asked, could you be comfortable with 3 cents? Could you be comfortable with 5 cents? Could you be comfortable with 10 cents? And certainly 10 cents came in, and it said that was too much. They could not support that. And they also, the other thing that they made clear was we want it to stay inside the compressed rate. So this year, we thought during the survey that we were expecting a 4 to 6 cent tax compression. Well, it ended up being almost 10 cents. So you wanted to stay inside that tax compression. So asking for 6 cents back would still give our voters a 3.7 cent tax decrease, while also being able to give the sustainable funding to the district. So the adopted tax rate is 98,192, which is 6 cents higher than that 92,192. So if the voters approve that, that will bring more funding to the district, and it will decrease the current tax rate of $1.01 down to that 98 cents, which is 3.7 cents less than what it was last year. If the VATRE measure is approved by voters, though, the impact is that it provides more local tax dollars to the district, but also a larger share of state contribution that will be put in by a larger percentage. So if voters do approve that 6 cent increase by voting in favor of the CSISD VATRE measure, then the district will receive the additional $2,164,622, with that split being, again, 56% paid by the state and 44% of it paid by our taxpayers. So as you can see, the majority of the funds generated from this VATRE are state funds. And that means that we'd be accessing funds that are already set aside for public schools, to be able to fund China Spring operations, including things like staff salaries and all of the programs that we all value. So you may ask, what does this kind of look like for a homeowner in China Spring? So our average home in China Spring, I think if I remember right, was like this year, $392,000 was the average home, is the value. I'm going to use 400,000 just because it's an easier number to do. And so when you minus off the homestead exemption, which is $100,000 right now for anybody 64 and under, well, I think it is for everybody right now. I think they're about to increase to 65. Well, hopefully they're going to increase all of ours. But and so the value of that taxable value of that $400,000 home becomes $300,000 when you take off that $100,000. And so again, like I mentioned just a second ago, there is a proposition on the ballot. It will be before our proposition to vote to raise or increase the homestead exemption. In 64 and under, it would increase it by 40,000, so it would be $140,000 homestead exemption. And by 65 and older, I believe it's 200,000. No, it's 150. It's 10 more thousand, I believe, for them. So it'd be 150, I believe, for our 65 and older. So let's look at how that kind of works out with taxes. 24-25, that $300,000 taxable home gave you taxes at $3,055.50. So next year, though, based on the new maximum rate, meaning if we were not having an election and you were compressing that full 10 cents, your taxes would be $2,765.76 on your school taxes. So asking for that 6 cents back, if the voters approve that 6 cents back, your taxes would be $2,945.76, which is still $110 less than what you currently paid in 24-25. So the good news is, no matter what happens, we're receiving a tax rate decrease, and taxes on our homes will go down unless the value of your home went up a great deal, which in China Spring, I know the average was about 3% increase. And I've talked to so many people that theirs decreased. Mine, actually, I thought mine, they decreased. And so I'm hopeful that a big majority of China Spring taxes decrease if you've been in your home for a few years. If you just bought pretty new, then your value probably will go up. If voters do approve that VATRE tax rate measure, the impact, for that median value home in our community, which is about $400,000, we'll pay less. We'll pay $110 less in taxes than last year. So if voters approve that tax measure, the impact for China Spring ISD is approximately $2.16 million in additional M&O funding that we can use to balance that budget, pay our teachers more, retain the high quality people that we have, continue to keep class sizes manageable, and continue to fund the programs that we currently have and student choice programs that we have, and have the opportunity to increase those when the opportunity presents itself. So now, one of the most important parts of this meeting, since it's after the VATRE's called, I want to talk to you about what the ballot language is going to look like. So on the screen, you can see what the ballot language says. It says, and this language is set by the state of Texas. It's not our choice to do this. It is required by law. So that right there is exactly what you'll see on the measure. It'll say this is a tax increase in all capital bold letters. And what you're doing is you're ratifying the ad valorem tax rate of 98,192 in China Spring ISD for the current year, a rate that will result in the increase of 6.5% in maintenance and operation tax revenue for the district for the current year as compared to the preceding year, which will provide an additional $2,164,622 in maintenance and operation funds for the district. So let's break that down a little bit. I talked to you about it. Will say this tax increase. That's Senate Bill 1025 was passed. And if you are raising the M&O tax rate above the state set limit at all, I told you if we had no election, our rate would be down at 92 cents, right? But when we are asking to increase that at all, even if it's less than your taxes last year, you're required to say this is a tax increase because it's based on the lowest set limit it could be. In that case, is 92 cents. We're asking for 98, even though it's still cheaper than the 101. It's still going to say this is a tax increase. And that's why it's important to know and important to talk to your family and friends and neighbors about that, because if you don't know that we're having a VATRE election, if you haven't been to any meetings, you're not a social media person, you haven't seen it at all, and you went to the polls, and the first thing you see is this is a tax increase, you have no knowledge of it whatsoever, knowing that actually it's not going to be an increase, it's going to be less than last year, but it's required by law to put that, then there's a good chance that you could vote no, or vote against the measure. And so we want people to have a good understanding of that so that when they go to the polls, they know what they are voting for, whichever choice they make. So what does ratifying the ad valorem tax mean? That just means it's a Latin term that means it's based on the property value. It refers to the M&O tax rate of $100 of property value. And so in this case, China Spring ISD is asking voters to approve changing or ratifying that rate from 92 to that 98. And then that when it will say that's going to increase 6.5% of maintenance and operation taxes. That's the difference between the 98 and the 92 to the 98. It will add 6.5% of funds to the maintenance and operation portion of the tax rate that we can use, for the day-to-day operations of the schools. And then it will bring in that $2,164,622 annually for the school. It also is not a yes/no vote. It is a for or an against. So when you vote for it, clearly you're saying I'm okay with having a 98-cent tax rate, which is a 3.7 cent decrease from last year. which gives that 2.16 million annually to the schools, and the school will address those deficit budgets and support those efforts in retaining, recruiting staff, maintaining class sizes, and so forth. A vote against that measure means that the overall tax rate, you're saying I want it to be 92 cents, 192, which is nearly 10-cent decrease from last year. And then CSISD will not receive that additional funding, and that $1.2 million deficit budget will be addressed, as I mentioned earlier, through the staffing changes of teachers, as well as non-teaching positions, and possibly some of those other fees and program cuts that we'll have to make to get to that zero-based budget. So nearly every other district in our area has passed a VATRE to support their maintenance and operation costs, which, are the day-to-day operating expenses, the fixed costs from salaries to field trip funding to insurance premiums, electric bills, etc. Most of those districts pass their VATREs for full 13 cents. You're allowed to do 13 cents. We are choosing to do 6 because we're trying to listen to our community of staying, 10 is too many, and staying inside that compression rate. And so most of these guys did it as far back as 2006. And they include Axtell, Bosqueville, Crawford, Robinson, Lorena, La Vega, Conley, Waco, and Groesbeck. Even West and Midway have already passed theirs. Theirs were smaller, though. I want to say, I know Midway's was 3 cents, and West could be somewhere between 3 and 5 also. It was not for the full amount. And so what that means, like if you look at it from our standpoint of just say 2 million extra dollars that we're getting, that means that since 2006, these schools have been receiving about $2 million a year more in funding for their school district to be able to educate their kiddos than China Spring ISD has. This is also why that China Spring ISD ranks in the lowest 25% of Central Texas of funding per student compared to all those other schools in Central Texas. So here's kind of what'll happen. If the community does approve a VATRE, meaning they show up to the polls in November, you vote for the VATRE approval tax rate increase, then the district will receive those funds as described, and we will use those funds as described. Meaning that we'll use them to support our smaller class sizes, so we can maintain a class size that where our kids can feel like they're receiving a more personalized instruction. We'll use it to competitively pay our staff over time. We'll make sure that we're trying to fund quality instructional programs and provide choices for our students. But the key is the community does have the final say. And so through the all community survey, we heard a wide range of voices. Not everyone agreed on everything, but there were some clear common things. And those are things that I've talked about over and over tonight, such as you want us to recruit and retain high quality staff. You want us to keep manageable class sizes. You want us to maintain the programs that make well-rounded education possible for our students. And so if the VATRE measure is approved, then that's what we'll be spending the additional funding on. So to sum it up, we encourage you all and hope you all encourage others to get informed just like you did today and show up at the polls. Early voting starts October 20th and runs through October 31st, and Election Day is November 4th. I want to thank you all for joining us today. I encourage you also to go to our website. There is a QR code on the screen right now that you can click on or use your camera and take a picture of and go to our VATRE website. If not, you can just go to chinaspringisd.net, and right there on the front page is our VATRE information. You can click on it and it'll take you to our VATRE website. Lots of really good information on there. I know I threw a lot at you right here today, so that way you have that to go back and review, share that with anyone you choose to share it with, and we appreciate you being here today. I'm going to see if I can get back into this Zoom now and see if there's any questions. Somebody asked, let's look like Haley, what is your estimated general fund balance for the current fiscal year? We started this year with about $7.5 million in fund balance. 1.2 million of that will be used for this year's deficit budget. And so that will get us down to whatever the difference is of that. I think it's about 6.3 million, which is that is our reserve uh, balance, but that's all we're allowed. I mean, we can't go under that according to TEA's recommendation of keeping that 60 to 90 days of operating expenses so that we can make our payroll and all those things. And the next question is, what is the smaller class size? We are, I don't have those numbers right here in front of me, but I'm thinking, if I remember right, I mean, we're held to 22-1 in pre-K through fourth grade. Most of those are somewhere between 20 and 22. There are some smaller ones at the pre-K level, and as they go up, but nobody gets over 22. And then starting in fifth grade on up, numbers are averaging more like 22 to 27 in that range. I know that's kind of a large range, but that is and it's hard to really look at average class size because you might have a couple of classes that are 13 and 12 because maybe it's the kind of class they are. Or maybe it's offered, it's an upper level AP class or something of that nature. But then you might have some, a classroom that lots of kids have to take that might be 27 or 28. And so, but average wise, it's in that around that 24 mark range. Okay, again, thank you all so much for joining us today. We do have several more of these. I think we have two more at least virtual ones. We have one more in person, and that's just at least what's scheduled. There could be more. And so I encourage you to have all your questions answered and encourage you to go to the polls well educated and vote the way your family feels like it should vote. So thank you again for joining us. And that's it.